Camille and I are going to dive into cognitive dissonance. And this actually came through as a request. Someone went onto the website, filled out the forms. So that's a reminder, everybody, we really read the forms. And someone said, can you talk about cognitive dissonance? We've had a lot of requests for different subjects and topics. No one's ever asked for this. And so it lit me up right away, because when I think of an embodied parts work, it's important to me to think about how do we apply that in this case? How can you describe to the listener how somatics can be a helpful application to allow the death of belief, essentially, to allow belief to transform into something new? I think it's really scary to
It is.
think about that for most people. They think, no, I have to keep my beliefs as they are to keep me solid.
Yeah, because that's who I am. If,
That's
if
who I
if my
am.
beliefs are who I am, and now my beliefs change, well, then who am I?
So I wanted to discuss cognitive dissonance with you because it's often seen through a negative lens. I think it's a really interesting thing, and I think it can be a really useful thing. So I guess we'll start by defining it for people listening. It usually has to do with two beliefs that essentially cancel each other out or kind of like tug on each other. So they don't allow for kind of an absolute truth. You know, this says one thing over here, but this is the opposite over here about the same situation. And maybe you can give the smoking example.
Yeah. Smoking is unhealthy, and I smoke every day. That is the dissonance. There's space between them.
So if you think of embodied parts work, which, let's say disembodied parts work, is when you're cognitively exploring like your younger self, so your younger part, or your protective part, or your angry part. Embodied parts work would be, let me feel the parts where the beliefs attached to, the parts of me that believe this thing. So one part of me that says smoking is really bad, I hate it, right? Where do I feel that in my body? Another part that says, but I love smoking so much. It just lights me up. It's so pleasurable. Where do I feel that in my body? And I wanted to start there with you because most people, I'm assuming, listening to this, they're really trying to get to this kind of absolute truth around the belief system for themselves, whether it's who they vote for, what they believe in, what they eat, health, weight loss, like whatever the situation is, as if there's this one self that's aligned with all of it. I think there's kind of infinite selves, and a lot of them tug at each other, which causes a freeze response for individuals. Let's kind of just dive in from there. Where do you go with that?
Yeah. So one of the first things I really like to acknowledge with cognitive dissonance is that oftentimes we talk about it in a cognitive way. You know, that there's an alignment between these two thoughts, or the thought and the behavior. And we can talk about how, oh, that causes stress. But I think it's really important somatically to take a moment to be with that can cause the stress that somatically causes in the body, when there is this dissonance between two thoughts, or a thought and an action. And like you were saying, I would say the couch within the belief that there should never be that dissonance, that there should never be that space. And so a really classic example is like what we're talking about, smoking or any other sort of habitual behavior or addiction. So I enjoy playing with cognitive dissonance in my own personal life, because it shows up in different ways. Mm, it isn't always bad in the sense that it's something I need to fix, but in some cases it is. It's a signal to me that something's out of alignment, that I do want to get in alignment. But in some cases, it's more of a sense of nuance, if that makes sense.
It does. I'm writing down some things because I think the first thing I wanted to speak about was this physical somatic rub, you know, like when you're embodying the dissonance, because
Mhm.
there's one thing to have two different beliefs around the same thing that oppose each other. There's another thing of feeling how that impacts the body. And a lot of people that do any kind of cognitive behavioral therapy or coaching or talk therapy to kind of work with cognitive dissonance, they're trying to get rid of the parts of the beliefs that cause the rub.
Mm.
And I get that. And I think the rub is super helpful for a number of reasons. One reason the rub is helpful for me is when it's time to update a belief system, right? So especially inherited belief systems, like ones I don't even think about for myself, I just kind of grew up with them. And then I start seeing a different story. There's a rub because my entire identity and sense of self is now being threatened. It's starting to fall away because beliefs have held up a certain identity of the world or me or other people. So part of the rub is a signal of, for me, some other part of me is waking up, right? And so that other part of me can be one I want to tend to. If there's a part of me that is, let's say I have a really limited belief about myself, and then suddenly something new is emerging that's opposite of that, there's going to be a tension because two different truths are happening in one body. But again, the tension, if we read this as something is off, then we go to try to fix and remediate the tension. What if we read the tension as something new is emerging, right? Like in the conflict, there is a physical vibration of something new about to come through. What if we just tended with that?
As you were speaking, the example that actually came up for me was my experience in the corporate space, where the rub that was increasingly coming up in my body was something I couldn't, it got to a point I couldn't ignore. There was some
Mhm.
dissonance between what I was physically doing every day. And I was going to say it was a subconscious belief, but I think on some level it's conscious. Like, this doesn't
Yeah.
make sense. Like, why am I doing this? And but that rub, rather than like, and this is what I was doing for a long time, I was trying to get rid of that tension. I was like, oh, I'm being
Yes.
unrealistic. I'm being irrational. I'm being entitled because I'm a millennial, whatever it is. But
Mhm.
when I got away from trying to get rid of the rub, get rid of the tension, getting rid of the cognitive dissonance, and instead use it as an opportunity, like you were saying, like something new is emerging. Like, what is it? And to go down a whole rabbit hole, then that took me to that place, like you were saying, of inherited beliefs, where I started to explore generational wisdom might be now generational trauma for me. And I might need to shift something that I had inherited that had been taught to me as a means of survival.
Yeah, so just everyone listening, I want to kind of just bring you up to speed if this is making sense at first when we're talking about cognitive dissonance. So think of music and think of someone playing guitar with a piano. And when the notes of the piano and the guitar are in the same tune, in the same chord, there's this beautiful, resonance we feel. There's this like feeling. When the chords are slightly off, there's a dissonance we feel. It's like a And people use that. I use that as a composer a lot. You can use dissonance to bring out certain emotional feelings and landscapes of a story or a song. In this case, we're talking about essentially the somatics of thoughts and beliefs, which is how does the belief sensation thought, or rather, how does the belief and thought show up as sensation in my body? When your beliefs are unquestioned, there's usually a lot of resonance. There's like that sense of, I know this. And we talk about this a lot in conflict work. When you go into a situation knowing something, there's a sense of safety there because it's so predictable, it's so certain. You have this almost a rigidity around it, but in that is a sense of self because there's a solidness. The moment something comes in that kind of loosens your solidness of what I know, that feels like what we call dissonance. That feels uncomfortable. It feels strange. It feels scary, unusual, whatever we want to call it. So I like this example because it's making me think of veganism. And that was like a
Mm,
huge cognitive dissonance for me
yeah.
because right here I was identifying for a very long time, 20 years or so, that vegan was the only way to live for health, for me. And then as my mind and my body started craving, my body first started craving animal products, then my mind was like, wait a minute, that's not allowed here. You're only allowed to think and feel this one thing. This is going to disturb all these other parts of your life. So initially, I did the thing that we do where I thought, well, this dissonant thought is disturbing what I've always known. And so there must be something wrong with it. So I have to really fight against this. And this is why I'm curious about exploring this notion of what if we let the dissonance be a teacher
Mhm.
about new beliefs, new needs, something that's breaking off and transforming. And I think for me, the fact that transformation is very dissonant, there's kind of like that I don't know, picturesque, poetic idea that transformation is this kind of beautiful, graceful unfurling, you know? And
Yes.
it's like I always think like Pocahontas in the wind, you know,
Yeah.
singing and I'm like, oh, that's transformation. And
Yeah.
I don't know about you, but all my transformation has been like horribly painful.
So messy. So
It's so messy.
messy. I
So what about dissonance as a somatic sign of transformation?
yeah, no, absolutely. Mm. Again, when we think about dissonance, it is that rub between two thoughts, or a thought and an action stemming from that other thought. And when we have that rub, especially when that dissonance hasn't been there before, when there seemed to be that alignment, and then the dissonance either begins or it gets to a point we can't ignore it anymore. Um, if I can embrace that dissonance and not be attached to either thought or behavior stemming from that thought, and be in a place of curiosity around, like, well, what if I changed one or the other? What if my thought changed? Or what if my behavior changed? What might that look like? And like you were saying, that is such a messy process because change is not easy. No one wants change because change disrupts the flow of things. We're in
Mhm.
a flow, we're in a rhythm. Don't nobody got time for change. I got to take care of kids, go to work, pay the bills. Change takes it takes time, space, and energy, resources many of us do not have. So rather than sort of embrace, like, oh, this is a change, it's like, oh, ain't nobody got time for that. We try to dismiss it. But I have really enjoyed over the last couple of years making space for change, and particularly not being attached to one thought or one behavior, being open to how things may shift over time for me, and using dissonance as a signal to me
Mm.
that shift is coming.
Yeah, I when you said using dissonance, I felt that right away
Mm,
because I think again, understandable initial response to dissonance is to push it away or kind of like iron it out, like make it almost assimilate into what you're used to.
yeah.
But dissonance is really just difference. It's like a different flow, a different vibration, a different sense. And when I think of being an intact person, I think of being in relationship with all of my differences, including things that cancel each other out or argue with each other, just to get a sense of like right now, what's true for me. So when I think of being an intact person, like people talk about, I want to be my whole self.
Hmm.
I think a lot of the ideas of whole self that we think that we project onto that notion is this kind of one true aligned self. And I don't really believe that. I think it's more about my whole self, or think of like your microbes, your bacteria, your biochemistry. There's so many parts, this giant orchestra of creatures inside of you that make you you. So beliefs are the same as me. They're these constant shapeshifters that go from one level of certainty until something disrupts that certainty and then it becomes a new flow. And I guess I wonder, with all the work that we've done with tending to rupture and conflict resolution and just political disagreements and such, and your own work in DEI, how can you describe to the listener how somatics can be a helpful application to allow the death of belief, essentially, to allow belief to transform into something new? I think it's really scary
It is.
to think about that for most people. They think, no, I have to keep my beliefs as they are to keep me solid.
Yeah, because that's who I am. If, if
That's who
if
I
my
am.
beliefs are who I am, and now my beliefs change, well, then who am I?
That's right.
And that's a really big question. Even if we take it outside the context of beliefs, like even if I attach to my job, well, if I lose my job, or if I realize I don't like my job, well, I can't not like my job, is who I am. And then if without this, then who am I? So even with that, and it can be difficult, particularly with beliefs, for us to not attach our sense of self to our beliefs. And again, I'll just speak personally, but can I hold that there's a belief that resonates with me right now, with all the information I have right now? This is my
Mm.
belief. And I might receive additional information. And with that additional information, my belief might change. But like you said, we generally don't sort of allow for that. Like when we talk, I don't hear it as much now in politics, but there was a big point like in the 90s and the early 2000s where you couldn't be a flip-flopper if you were a
Mhm.
politician. Like if you came out on a platform in this latest campaign, they would show a video from an earlier campaign, like you can't do that, you're flip-flopping. And so there's just this idea like you can't change or you're a flip-flopper. So for me, what I might invite people to do somatically is explore that. What overcouplings do we have related to changing a belief? Are you a flip-flopper? Is it like this is who I am, and if I change my belief, do I feel like I'm just flailing in the wind, that I have no sense of self without this particular belief? And just how we were also speaking at the top of the show about embodied parts work, what part of me feels that? Is
Mhm.
there a part of me that is actually really settled and okay with releasing this belief that doesn't have the overcoupling of being a flip-flopper, that doesn't feel that who I am is this belief, but more so the container of this belief? And can I hold both of those in the same space?
Yeah, a couple of things come up for me when you say that. One is the difference between me and my beliefs.
Mm,
And I think that's the first thing just to feel into for everyone listening is that there's a difference. Like I'm the believer, but I'm not the belief. It's something I'm attaching to. And to feel that difference, to feel like I'm here and I'm rooted regardless of my belief, and then the belief comes from there, is a whole other experience. Just it's like the finding safety inside compared to outside. If my beliefs are my source of safety, then I'm nothing
yes.
without them. They change me in that way. And they definitely shift me a lot, but my sense of self doesn't ride on my beliefs necessarily. So I think that's an interesting place to play with this conversation of cognitive dissonance. Because if I'm afraid of a changing belief because my identity rests on it, cognitive dissonance is going to be really scary.
Right.
And it's going to be something I go to therapy for, I try to get rid of in my life versus the embodied parts work. And I actually think of one client just came to mind very long time ago uh, as an example of why someone would want to get rid of cognitive dissonance. And this is someone who had a child and her son, let's say 3 years old, and everything in her regrets having a baby, right?
Mm,
So here's this mother has a child, chose to have a child, wanted a child, and now 3 years into it, so much of her, as she says, regrets having this child. She ruined her life. She's a horrible mother. Her child hates her. She hates her child. This is a perfect example of someone that's like, I need to get rid of this cognitive dissonance so I can take care of my child. Now, even in that example, I would still say getting rid of it is not a good idea, right? Because there's
mhm.
some reason that there's parts of her saying, I hate this child that really deserves some investigation and
Yeah.
questioning and sitting with and getting to know, well, what does this part need?
Mhm.
And this is why I love overcouplings, because as I started working with her, like actually a lot of women I worked with in this case, 'cause I attracted a lot of artists and artists have, from what I've seen, have a very, very hard time becoming parents because there's this, especially later in life when they give birth in their 40s or such, because they've had such a long span of being alternative and living their life from a them-centered place, not even rudely, but just like they flow in this very
Yeah.
open way. No one clings to them. They're very free in how they live day to day. Now suddenly they're completely anchored to this child that depends on them, and there's like a hatred that comes up. And what would emerge over and over again were these overcouplings of their mothers they grew up with who were kind of trapped in the role of mother or trapped in the role of woman, especially woman to a man or woman to a child, and outside of that had no other life. So there was this utter terror that filled their bodies of I'm stuck here, I'm trapped here, there's no getting out. And that terror created these thoughts, these beliefs of I shouldn't have done this. This is the wrong thing. I'll never be a good mom. I ruined my life. If we would have just tried to get rid of the dissonant thoughts, that whole underbelly, that whole landscape of what they were holding on to would have been completely unknown,
Yeah.
and it would have festered into a new group of dissonant beliefs, right? So I by being with the dissonance, by saying it actually has something to teach us, they got to learn that they were projecting, just like you said, their generational trauma, what came from their mothers, they were projecting onto themselves and their children. When they stopped doing that and they uncoupled, they realized, I get to do this however I want. I don't have to do
Right.
this like my mom did it. And then the dissonant thoughts shifted, but that's because we allowed the dissonance in.
Yes. Yes. I love that for so many reasons. Like, so as you were sharing that, it made me think of the example that I've shared in other podcasts and other HLN spaces of, sometimes when my children come asking me, like right now,
Oh, I was
the
thinking
thought
that.
will come up, I fucking hate my kids. And so
Yeah.
there will be that cognitive dissonance between there's one thought that says I fucking hate my kids, and then there's this other, they're the most precious thing to me in the world. But if
Yeah.
I tried to like get rid of it or tried to say, like, oh, this one shouldn't be here because this is the right one, there would be so much more dissonance because for me, the dissonance that then would emerge would be denying that one part, that moment just that just says like, oh, I fucking hate my kids, knowing that that is not the only way I feel about my kids. But to suppress that for me would create even more dissonance, which would further tarnish the way I show up as a
Mhm.
mother, because it would be manifest as a form of fawning. Then even more resentment and rage would come out rather than just letting myself have that thought and not freak out about that thought and just letting it
Mhm.
be there.
Yeah, so that example right there exactly is when we're talking about like resolving cognitive dissonance, it's another way of saying repressing
Yes.
boundaries, right? Because a lot of dissonance, so there's what we're talking about, there's a belief system dissonance where, oh, a new belief came in that kind of argues everything I believed. Okay, that's to me, that's growth. That means I'm seeing the world in a different lens and it's going to change me as a person. I'm scared of that change. So that's growth in my opinion. So dissonance in that way can be growth. But then dissonance in another way like this can be boundary. Like it's true I love my child and right now they're pissing me off.
Yeah.
What's it like if both are allowed to exist here? What if my dissonance is actually a way my body shows me what I need in this moment, relationally, in proximity for myself, to be able to tend to this child? You and
Mhm.
I teach this a lot in our embodied parenting group. And I think our next one's fall 2025. I think it's
I
fall this
believe so.
year. We'll
Yes,
find
fall
out.
this year
You'll find
ish.
out. I think it's fallish. Um, but we teach this piece a lot, and it's amazing, Camille. I'm sure you see this too. To see the parents' faces on the screen, the relief of like,
Mhm.
I'm allowed to hate them
Right.
sometimes. Like, I'm allowed to love them and hate them simultaneously. It's like, yep,
It's weird. I love watching the faces when I say it because it's this moment of like terror and then relief. It's like, what?
totally, totally.
Yes. Yeah.
And what's important to me about that is when, like you said, when you are in relationship with the dissonance, even like our ability to laugh at it, you don't become abusive.
Right.
It's like the abuse comes, screaming at a kid, hitting a kid, getting really avoidant with your children. That comes from a constant repressing of the
Yes.
dissonance or letting it completely take over. But being with the dissonance, noticing like, oh God, I have a rub with them in the room, even though I love them. You learn so much about what you need as a parent in that moment.
Right. Yeah. And for me, this is what it really means to be in relationship with ourselves, with our various parts, and not necessarily picking one over the other, but noticing that they're all there. Um, and again, just sort of repeating here that when we repress one over the other or try to dismiss one, for that's where a lot of the turmoil can emerge.
That's right. And as we're saying this, I'm starting to think of the freeze response because I brought that up earlier.
Mhm.
And what's interesting about, again, another example of why people want to get rid of cognitive dissonance is it acts sometimes as a brake pedal when you're trying to move forward with something. And this
Oh
is
yeah.
very true for ADHD. When you have like 8 things that hit your brain at once that you want to do, it overwhelms the body so much because you're literally being pulled in so many different directions that the body becomes immobilized. Whereas if there's one direction with no dissonance, there's kind of like an alignment and a movement, and you just move toward it and get stuff done. So I think it's also interesting to consider how cognitive dissonance, even the word cognitive is in there, it's a somatic dissonance, a rub that comes from different cognitive states. So it's kind of starting at the top, working its way down.
Mhm.
What I find helpful is to get that. It's happening in the brain, it's happening in the mind. But then notice, okay, in my body, what part wants this and what part doesn't. So I'll give you an
Yeah.
example. So I have to pay the bills, take out the trash, answer emails. So there's these three things coming up. But right now, all I want to do is look out the window, right? So when I'm looking out the window and I think of those three things, I start getting a constriction, I start getting a pressure, I start getting this building of tension. Let the tension again be a teacher. Let tension be a teacher. Let it show me, okay, right now there's something in my body that's bracing against those things. And this is why I love the feeling the now practice. Those of you listening who don't know, I have a practice called feeling the now. It's like 5 minutes long. And you literally are just feeling where you are in this moment and noticing the difference between how I feel my current experience to how I feel the thoughts from the past or future or the memory of past or future. So I'm looking out the window at the tree. And right now, as I'm doing this, there's a squirrel eating an acorn. It's adorable. And so I feel like all this joy in my chest, my shoulders soften, like my head wants to fall back. I'm like, that squirrel is so cute. And I settle into that and I really just lap that up. And I'm not doing this in real time, but if I were, then I wait to see email, trash, or bills, which one emerges. Like
Mhm.
from the state of this ease of sitting here relaxing for a couple minutes, which one's the first thing I have capacity for? Because when we get into capacity and desire, we have the things that we want to do or wish we do, and then we have the physical body's ability to do those things. And for a lot of us, when we have the dissonance come up, it's about just pausing and orienting to something pleasurable, feeling that pleasure, and then from there, what emerges, essentially to accomplish or do from that place. And I wonder if
Yeah.
you could add anything to that.
Well, so but for me, it still just goes back to that idea of like it's a signal of something that's coming up, something that can be shared or learned from. And particularly that example really resonates with me because right now I am in the midst of winter. So I am loving this depressive, hibernating state that I'm in. And there is still the things that say, well, no, you should be doing this. So I still have those thoughts of like you should be productive. And very much like you described, it is a somatic practice for me to not get rid of that thought, either thought, the thought of, I just want to hibernate, depressed, be depressed, and lull around, and the thought that says you need to get your ass up and do things because that's what an adult does. It's not about getting rid of either thought, but really exploring in my body where each thought is emerging from. And so particularly that thought of you need to get your ass up and do some things. If I when I track that, that comes from a place of like really urgency and constriction and a judgment. Like I even feel my shoulders go up when I sit with that, which is interesting to me. Okay, and then so I want to stay with that a little bit further, and then I might notice like, oh, what's the fear or the concern that it's responding to, and so I can sit with that a little bit, and it might be that, oh, people might think you're irresponsible. Oh, well, that's interesting because now really the concern is what other people think of me. And so it just takes me sort of down this place of exploration to really understand like what is it and now I'm getting a little esoteric. Is there really a dissonance or is this something else?
Hmm. And I wanted to say when you said, is there really a distance or is it something else? I use this example a lot, but when I was training as an herbalist, there were certain herbs that were said to um, thrive in disturbed soil. And I always loved the idea of thriving in disturbed soil.
Mm.
And then there's also the idea in herbalism that the edges are where you're going to find the most life in an ecosystem. So, like where a cornfield meets a forest, right at the edge, or the edge of a train track. And that's one reason is because of the dissonance. There's all these kind of like opposing forces that create this amazing competition for life. And so all this plant life seeds such proliferate out of that, disturbed, dissonant soil. So when you said, is it something else? And earlier I was saying differences in belief sometimes means growth. To me, that it's the same analogy as with the herbs. It's like if I believed one thing, like if I think of veganism for 20 years, And then suddenly something else starts to open in my mind and body. I'm growing, not better or worse growing, but just something new is emerging out of me. And there's a tension to that because my body wants to protect what it's always known, which is this
Mm.
is who I am with this story and belief. Now I'm moving into an unknown part of myself. And I think the dissonance is often this, if I think of kind of like the inner relationship work, the dissonance is parts of my body that are very set in their way and feel safe there, bracing against this new part that wants to emerge, almost like a dandelion sprouting through a parking lot,
Mhm.
like this asphalt and cement trying so hard to contain this thing and keep it from ruining its structure. It's essentially a disturbing of our structure.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. What it is. It's sort of like you were saying, it's not Pocahontas in the wind, or the example I always I think of is when changes. We're all a caterpillar and we go into our cocoon and we do our chrysalis and we all emerge as a butterfly and the transition has emerged and it was this beautiful, seamless, linear process. But it's not like for at least for me in my experience and observation, it isn't seamless. It isn't linear. It is messy. It's gross. It's we want to stop it. We want to impede it sometimes, and then we open ourselves up to it, and then we stop it again because it's new and some
Mhm.
change and something new, something unfamiliar can be inherently threatening to us, whether it's we're disturbing how we've always seen ourselves, or like we're disturbing what we've always known. We're disturbing our potentially our relationships, our
Mhm.
networks, and that newness is it can be scary. And like I was saying before, it takes work, it takes energy, it takes time to be with all of that.
Yeah, I want to say we're going to start closing because I'm feeling so satisfied with this conversation. But when you were saying that, I wanted to just repeat, like, it literally threatens our form. When you talk about the caterpillar, it's from caterpillar to butterfly, there's this whole deformation that happens, as we know. Like, becomes a liquid. It
Mm,
like acidifies in its own enzymes and digests itself and becomes like a pool of liquid and then turns into a butterfly. Imagine how disorienting that would be, if our,
yeah.
our entire body becoming a pool of liquid and turning into a whole other structure. And we have to learn how to use and fly and taste and breathe and see with that structure. So there's a similarity here where cognitive dissonance, it does threaten your form. And when I say threatens your form, it threatens the form of your identity, sometimes the form of your life, depending on what the situation is. But if we pause and we don't see the dissonance as a life threat, like a form threat is different than a life threat for me.
Mm,
And when I'm using threat, just I guess, I don't know, to be tense, to be dramatic. It just feels right. It just feels right. It's like something about the dissonance is really telling you something's coming to change your form. And the reason why I love somatic practices is they hold me while my form is changing.
yeah.
Anyone listening, if you just sit here and you scan your body for some place that's tense and you kind of hold that for a minute, like put your hand wherever the tension is and just hold it, you can feel something shifting in you. Whether there's more tension, whether there's less, whether it stays the same, you can feel these weird internal movements your body makes, kind of like the caterpillar turning to goo and then something else. So I love cognitive dissonance.
Mm,
My whole childhood as an intersex person was cognitive dissonance. There was constantly things coming in, whether I wanted them to or not, because of my biology of right, wrong, normal, abnormal, deformed,
mm,
formed. And so to develop in that, and also in a multicultural house, or family, it was interesting to notice I was always being pulled in so many directions. And I think that's why I'm so set, like stubbornly set on not having absolute truth, because there are you said earlier, with the information I know now, I believe this. And I think it's really powerful for everyone to consider what if everything we believed, where there's a humility behind it, which
yeah.
says, with my limited knowledge now, this is what I believe. And what if we just lived from that place? Because it's always a possibility to get just enough knowledge to start shifting what you thought was always true. And to me, that's like a saving grace. I look forward to those moments, even when they hurt.
Yes.
Closing thoughts on that.
So, I mean, you said the key word that was coming up for me, and I was going to close with humility. That's and particularly two words that were coming up for me: humility and predictability. So
Hmm.
what we're fearing is that we're losing that predictability. And I empathize with that, because that was my safety child,
Hmm.
predictability. If I could pinpoint everything, live my life, 6 months in advance, know exactly what was going to happen, I was smooth sailing. But to your point, part of what has supported me through navigating unpredictability is humility. Humility about what I know, but also humility about what I think should be, or what I should be experiencing or should be happening. That has been really integral into me expanding my capacity to be with unpredictability. And to experience humility from a somatic sense too has been very different. It's one thing to say, I should be humble. I know I don't know everything. What part of me not only feels that I don't know everything, but expands into that, softens into that ground, like actually feels content and grounded in the fact that, yeah, I don't know everything and I don't know what's going to happen.
What's that quote people use? Like, do I want to be in a loving relationship, or do I want to be right? You know that
Oh, yes.
question?
Yeah,
And
yeah,
that's,
yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah.
as you're saying this, is what I'm hearing. It's
Mhm.
like to walk through life with the humility of, I believe this for now. Uh, it really, for me, it allows me to take my beliefs off the hierarchy. Like, mine are the best, mine are the only ones, mine are better than yours. It's kind of like, this is what I believe.
Mhm.
You can believe what you want to. And even when we play with our own cognitive dissonance, then we get more comfortable with other people's dissonance. So when someone's belief feels dissonant to mine, I don't run away screaming or trying to cancel them. I'm like,
Mhm.
oh wow, we have like a rub. Let's
Yeah.
check this out together. And some of the best friendships of mine emerged from that rub.
Or similarly, like I now to witness other people's cognitive dissonance, to hear them
Mhm.
say like one belief, and then I witness their actions, and I'm
Mhm.
witnessing that there's space between that. I can now get curious, like, why might that be the case? I know what they said they believe, and I'm seeing what they're actually doing. Why is there that space?
Hmm. Yes, let's end on that. We have our members here waiting patiently. We're going to do a little collective weaving with them to see what they're coming up with this, their questions, what they're learning. We used to offer this to the library membership. We closed our library membership as of a week ago. Going into 2025, I felt such a need to simplify and make things really simple and basic. And that was part of the decision. Even though on paper it made us money, everyone said, don't do it. I'm like, we're going to do it. So we just have one membership now. And those of you that were in the library membership or want to be part of it, you can join one of our courses this year. And then you get to be part of the membership after the course. So we're going into our member only zone right now. Thank you, Camille, for, as usual, being a very resonant voice. I keep waiting for our dissonance to emerge, and I'm just very spoiled. It doesn't emerge very often. And when it does, it's very graceful. But thank you, love. Thanks for parsing this out with me. And thank you for the
Absolutely.
request, whoever sent it. That's the end of today's episode. Now let's take a moment to notice where we feel the episode in our bodies. Close your eyes. Take a breath. And let whatever wants to come up, come up. And remember, those sensations hold the wisdom that we're looking for. If you want to go deeper, visit holisticlifenavigation.com. I have developed a 4-week self-paced course that takes 18 years of my personal and professional experience and puts it into one place where you can easily and quickly learn the foundations of recovering from stress and trauma. How does the food you eat affect your stress levels? How do the relationships in your life create stress or peace? How does the relationship you have with your body allow you to feel happier and more settled? I will cover all this and so much more in this 4-week self-paced course. And the best part, it's self-paced. You don't have to sign up at a certain date or finish it at a certain time. It's yours for life, and it's waiting there for you when you're ready to finish it. Throughout this course, I'll be teaching you philosophies and practices that combine my 3 favorite modalities: somatic experiencing, embodied parts work,
and nutrition. For more information on this course, click on the link in my episode details.